Hello everyone, this is Sorvesteon coming to you with another World of Warships comparison video. This comparison was inspired by the new Tachibana, which got me thinking that Tier 2 destroyers need a little more YouTube love. I also thought reviewing them would be quick and easy. I mean, they're Tier 2 ships, right? So how much could there be to say about them? Well, these ships have quite a bit of depth, and definitely require some skill to make the most of them. I even had some small 4-on-4 late night battles when I was making this video, where I pretty much single-handedly wiped out the whole team. So if you play smart and have a bit of luck on your side, these ships can be terrifying monsters. Now, before we get into the ships themselves, I wanted to say, like I always do, that all these ships are fully upgraded, have detectability reduction camouflage on, and are using the same commander skills for the sake of comparison. However, I will talk a bit about commander skills when I cover the Storrow Savoy. And I'm not going to go into super great detail on each ship's stats and tactics, as I think that's better left for individual ship reviews. So with that out of the way, let's get to it, shall we? The first ship we're going to look at is the Sampson, which I think provides a great entry into the American destroyer line. Like its American successors, it's got a bit of a different layout than other nations' destroyers. But Wargaming has made this layout very successful in the game, if you know how to use it right. Before we go into that though, I wanted to talk about this ship's big weakness, which is its survivability. Now at first glance, it looks like it has pretty decent survivability. I mean, it has average armor and the second most HP. But unfortunately, destroyer survivability doesn't actually have much to do with how much armor or how much HP you have. That's because compared to the firepower of cruisers and battleships, and even other destroyers, a few more millimeters of armor or an extra 1000 HP is going to have a negligible effect on keeping you alive. Instead, destroyers are almost entirely dependent on maneuverability, concealment, and the way you play them. And in those areas, you can immediately see that the Sampson has straight up the worst maneuverability and concealment out of all the Tier 2 destroyers. So that means how you play this ship is very important. You'll definitely be wanting help from your teammates to spot targets for you. And you'll definitely be wanting to use cover to sneak up into range of those targets. Thankfully, on the maps that this ship plays on, there is usually plenty of cover, like on this map. And here my team has so graciously spotted an enemy chester for me, which I wouldn't have been able to see on my own because there's an island between us. But that works in my favor, as I haven't been spotted yet, and that chester doesn't know I'm sailing up behind this island, which gives me an opportunity to use it to get up close and get myself positioned to make a torpedo run, while he continues to sail merrily along, totally oblivious. Now by the time I get spotted, it's already too late for this poor guy. He is going to get wrecked, and there's just nothing he can do to stop it. So I fired off my first salvo, but I don't have to wait for the torpedo launchers on this side to finish reloading, as I have another set on the other side I can use. So by just turning my ship a bit, he sails right into the line of fire of my other launchers and totally seals his fate. And that's probably the most beautiful thing about the Sampson, because not only does she get 4 torpedo launchers, 2 on each side, but as you can see, those launchers have very wide firing arcs because they are mounted on the sides of the ship and not in the center. And each launcher can rotate around nearly the full firing arc. And what's more, as you can see here, is that by alternating between sides, she can fire almost continuously. And with the ability to launch 8 torpedoes in quick succession, if you can get all of them to hit, the Sampson has the ability to kill a stock Tier 3 battleship in a single strike. Very lethal indeed. And its torpedoes are very good. They don't hit as hard as other Tier 2 destroyers, but they are fast for this tier, and that makes them harder to avoid. Coupled with the fact that the Sampson has a very fast torpedo reload speed, and that it can fire torpedoes from almost any angle, means it's very deadly once it gets within range. Now it also has very decent guns, which will finish the job if its torpedoes don't get you first. Typical of the American destroyer line, the Sampson's guns rotate the fastest and have a good rate of fire, so other destroyers beware. And the Sampson is unique in her design because it allows the two side guns to fire forwards without having to angle the ship. This means that she can fire 3 of her 4 guns in almost any direction. So like the other American destroyers, I consider the Sampson to be a hard-hitting ambusher. And that's my final verdict for the ship. The Storozhevoi is a very different beast than the Sampson, and is very representative of what the Russian destroyer line is like. This ship is definitely a gunboat, no doubt about it, and does very well escorting cruisers and battleships. However, she also does very well as an ambusher, where her torpedoes can really shine. Now, the Storozhevoi is one of the more squishier Tier 2 destroyers, but she has really good speed and maneuverability to help her dodge incoming shells and torpedoes. And while her concealment is almost as bad as the Sampson's, it's not really a problem for the Storozhevoi, because she doesn't need to get up close and personal to be effective. She has the longest maximum firing range, and her shells travel very fast over a low arc, making it much easier to hit things with her guns than in other Tier 2 destroyers. And that's where this destroyer prefers to be, at range, where because of her great maneuverability, she can be very hard to hit. She can be even more annoying when she lays down a smokescreen to cover herself and her allies and just spams HE at her enemies. And HE is what you should be using in this ship, because she has the best chance to set fires with her quick rate of fire out of all the Tier 2 destroyers. However, she does have a few problems with her guns. You can see here that the structure of the ship obstructs one of her guns from firing forwards at sharper angles, and this forces the Storozhevoi to really go broadside in order to fire all of her guns. And her guns don't exactly rotate quickly. In fact, they have the slowest rotation speed of all the Tier 2 destroyers, so you're going to have problems tracking other destroyers at close range, especially if you need to change sides. Unless you sail in a straight line, which is pretty much asking to get wrecked. Now, because she is a gunboat, the commander skills I use are very different from those I showed earlier, which were strictly to show off the differences between the different destroyers. You can see that instead of buffing her torpedoes, I use the commander skills to buff her guns instead. As I mentioned before, the Storozhevoi makes a great ambusher, because she has an excellent torpedo armament. Anything that gets within 3 kilometers is gonna have to contend with 3 torpedo launchers that have 3 tubes each, and fire some very deadly torpedoes. No other Tier 2 destroyer is able to fire 9 torpedoes in one salvo, and that kind of firepower gives this little ship a really nasty close-in punch. Enough punch, in fact, to take out a fully upgraded Tier 3 battleship in one strike, which we're gonna see in this clip. Again, just like we saw with the Sampson, I'm using the island as cover to get within 3 kilometers of that lone South Carolina that my team is spotting for me, and set up my ambush. Now, I was really lucky that there was no other enemy ships around, and that let me cut my engines and wait patiently for the South Carolina to sail closer. And once she gets within 4 kilometers, I start my engines back up and activate my engine boost, so that as I come around the island, I'm just within my 3 kilometer torpedo firing range, and I totally catch the South Carolina by surprise. With the engine boost complementing the Storozhevoi's high speed, I'm quickly able to close the gap and get into a nice position to launch my torpedoes. And in no time at all, the South Carolina is heading to the bottom of the sea. And that's really important, because the Storozhevoi doesn't have the HP to sail in front of an enemy battleship at point-blank range for very long. Now, I wanted to show you one more clip featuring the Storozhevoi's torpedoes, because it's just so freaking awesome. Again, I used the islands to ambush the enemy. And now, I'm just gonna shut up and let you watch what happens.
Critical engine damage.
And stupid me, I completely forgot to even check the results, because I left the battle right after I died, and I was too focused on making this video. So yeah, the Storrow Savoy is pretty scary at close range. Don't go within 3 kilometers of one. Now, in addition to its very short range, the Storrow Savoy's torpedo armament has a few other weaknesses you should be aware of. One being the considerably longer reload time compared to other Tier 2 destroyers. So, her torpedoes are indeed powerful, but you better make your first salvo count, because if you don't, you'll probably die before you can fire a second. Another weakness, as you can see here, is the very limited angles at which you can fire your torpedoes. That means to use your powerful torpedoes, you may really need to turn the ship a lot to get them pointed at your target, which can eat up a lot of precious time. So that's the Storrow Savoy in a nutshell. This ship reminds me a lot of a glass cannon, and that's my final verdict for it. The Umikaze, just like her counterparts, represents her own line very well. And that means she's all about them torps, no trouble. She's all about them torps, no trouble. So anyways, she is very stealthy, and she excels at being a scout and spotting for her teammates. I find the Umikaze is less suited to island romping and likes to play in open water where she can take full advantage of her strengths. Now, the Umikaze has the best survivability out of all the Tier 2 destroyers. She's got the most HP, very good maneuverability, and great concealment. And that great concealment is something you definitely want to take advantage of. Unlike the Sampson and the Storozhevoi, she can sail out into the open and invisitorp. And invisitorping is the Umikaze's big claim to fame. No other Tier 2 destroyer has a torpedo range longer than its surface detectability range. And it does have a long range for this tier. At a whopping 8 kilometers, no other Tier 2 destroyer even comes close. Sadly though, she only has 2 torpedo launchers with 2 tubes each, so she can only fire 4 torpedoes per salvo. And while it's slightly better than the Storrow Savoy, her torpedo firing arcs are still much more limited than the Sampson's. Here I fired a full salvo of torpedoes from a range of 6.4 kilometers. Now, as you can see, the torpedoes are very slow for the distance they have to travel, which means you are going to miss a lot. I fired 4 salvos at that South Carolina, and only 1 salvo hit. And that's because in the time it takes your torpedoes to reach their target, chances are high that your target will have already changed course. So you really need to be good at predicting what people are going to do, or just be lucky enough to have them sail in straight lines for you. Later in the same battle, I fired my torpedoes from a range of 7.3 kilometers at another South Carolina. Now, this South Carolina also ended up coming under fire from a friendly Emden, which set him on fire, and made the South Carolina use his damage control party consumable to put it out, not knowing a bunch of torpedoes are heading his way. And in this case, it just so happens that this South Carolina, busy with the Emden, decided to sail in a nice straight line for me, scoring me 2 more torpedo hits and causing flooding, which did end up being his downfall. You can see here that he did end up taking over 16,000 damage just from flooding, which is basically half a fully upgraded South Carolina's HP. So this just illustrates that with the Umikaze, patience pays off. Now, I think a lot of people get frustrated with the Umikaze and try to get in a lot closer to improve their odds of hitting with their torpedoes, but I really don't recommend that. Even though the Umikaze's torpedoes do the most damage, other Tier 2 destroyers like the Sampson and the Storozhevoi just have so many more, and they, plus the Tachibana, all have much better guns. And remember how I said the Umikaze has very good maneuverability? Well, that comes mostly from her speed, because the Umikaze really sucks at turning. So all this really puts her at a huge disadvantage in close range fights, where if you do end up winning, it's mostly going to be because you got lucky. I really recommend staying at range and patiently invisitorping larger, slower targets like cruisers and battleships as a silent sniper, which is my final verdict for this ship. Last up, we have the Premium Tachibana that was available for free by completing the Kaiju Hunter missions. Despite being a Japanese destroyer, the Tachibana is very different from the Umikaze, and at first glance, the Tachibana really looks inferior to the rest of the other Tier 2 destroyers. Her guns don't have the range like the Storozhevoi, nor is she able to invisitorp like the Umikaze, and she doesn't get more HP or more torpedoes like the Sampson. But I'm here to tell you that although she is different, she is definitely not inferior. The first thing you need to understand about the Tachibana is that she is the epitome of a hit-and-run attacker, and that's why she has the best concealment. She is designed to pop out of nowhere, hit hard and fast, and then disappear again like a ninja. Because she really doesn't have the HP to sit around in a protracted fight trying to finish off her enemies. This makes her survival far more dependent on effective use of cover than any other Tier 2 destroyer, and in areas where cover is not available, she will need to make effective use of her smokescreen instead, or she will really suffer. In fact, she is so squishy, she could take damage from a nosediving seagull on a kamikaze mission. And you can see here that one of my HE shells penetrates and detonates the magazine of this enemy Tachibana, because she just has no armor at all. So you might want to run anti-detonation flags when you play this ship if you have them. To counter the fact that she really cannot take hits, she's got fantastic turning ability to help her dodge incoming shells and torpedoes and angle herself quickly to get her torpedoes in the water fast. Now if you like guns and destroyer fights, then this is the ship for you. The Tachibana gets more guns than any other destroyer at her tier. Now they don't have that great of a maximum firing range, and her gun caliber is the smallest, but her rate of fire is right up there with the Storrow Savoy. Her guns also excel in another critical area, and that is rotation speed, which is very necessary for this ship, because the Tachibana is going to be turning a lot, and these guns are able to stay on target even in close range engagements with other destroyers. This also gives the Tachibana the freedom to dodge and maneuver without missing out on opportunities to fire her guns and wasting crucial seconds when she's battling other destroyers. So make no mistake, the Tachibana's guns are more than sufficient to shred other destroyers pretty quickly. Now, most destroyer engagements don't last that long, so she is still a hit-and-run attacker. She just excels at hitting other destroyers very hard. Cruisers and battleships, on the other hand, will barely feel her shells at all. But with a great rate of fire, she's got a pretty good chance of setting fires, so her guns are far from useless against more heavily armored targets. Just don't try to use AP shells on this ship. Actually, you shouldn't be using AP shells on any destroyer. Now, for those of you who just had a WTF moment, let's sit down and think about this for a minute. In most cases, the maximum AP shell damage isn't that much better, and against other destroyers, AP will generally over-penetrate, while it will hardly ever penetrate cruiser armor, and fires are a much more effective way of doing damage for destroyers anyways, so I stand by what I said. I wouldn't use AP on destroyers. Now, when it comes to her torpedoes, the Tachibana has the shortest reload time, a very good range, and her torpedoes do a good amount of damage. But they are horribly slow and easy to dodge. The Tachibana also gets the same number of launchers and torpedo tubes as the Umikaze, so she can only fire 4 torpedoes per salvo. And she also shares the same limited torpedo firing arc. Now, considering that she cannot invisitorp, she really lacks the firepower to take out battleships quickly and prevent them from retaliating. You can see in this clip, I hit that Kawachi with 4 torpedoes and didn't even come close to sinking it. However, as we can see in these next 2 clips, her torpedoes are still more than sufficient for taking out cruisers. And by using the terrain to hide her presence, she can do that quite safely, because the Tachibana's 5-kilometer torpedo range gives her the ability to fire her torpedoes between islands and then quickly sail behind cover, keeping her from ever being spotted. If people are not aware of a destroyer, they usually don't think about changing course to avoid potential incoming torpedoes, which allows the Tachibana to safely score cruiser kills despite having very slow torpedoes. Now, this strategy completely depends on being at the right place at the right time and having a little luck, just like the Umikaze depends on players sailing in straight lines. but I don't recommend trying to get up close and personal with cruisers to try and improve your odds of hitting with your torpedoes in a ship as fragile as the Tachibana. But this is a great strategy to use against enemy destroyers at very close ranges, where they have very little time to dodge your torpedoes. So to sum all this up, the Tachibana is basically a hit-and-run anti-destroyer gunboat. And as I mentioned before, I like to think of the Tachibana as a ninja, and that's my final verdict for this ship. So I want to thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this comparison of the Tier 2 destroyers, and I hope you subscribe to my channel for more videos like this about World of Warships. As always, take care and happy sailing!